Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 TV Shows of 2018. This is my annual video. I believe it's my third annual video, or maybe it's my fourth. I don't know. It's been a while, but I've been doing this for a while. Every year, with the end of the year, I count down my top 10 favorite TV shows. This is something I keep track of all year round, where I keep the list and see rate the shows as they come out. So it's something I'm very interested in, even if many of my viewers are not, where I count down my top 10 favorite TV shows that came out this year. So, as always, the way I determine whether a show is eligible for this countdown is if the season ended in the calendar year of 2018. So certain shows like Vikings, which is still going in season 5, it's not going to end until next January, February, so it won't be eligible for this countdown. It will be eligible for the 2019 countdown. Likewise, if a show started in 2017 but the season ended in 2018, such as Star Trek Discovery, then it is eligible for this countdown. Also, Netflix shows or shows that dropped late or finished a run late December last year are also eligible for this year because they finished too late to be included in last year's countdown. So they're eligible for this year's countdown, such as Black Mirror Season 4. Which came out late December last year. Also, this is a really strange year because this is actually the first year I've been doing it where I have 2 seasons of a single show are both eligible for this countdown. That is Travelers, because Travelers Season 2 finished at the end of last year. At least for me, I go by when it's available for me here in New Zealand. I know in Canada it finished earlier, but I don't go by Canada. I go by country I live in. And for me, it didn't drop until late December, so it wasn't able to make last year's countdown. However, Travelers Season 3 dropped for me in early December this year, so it was actually eligible this year, so both Season 2 and Season 3 are eligible. So that's a bit weird. Anyway, I've watched about, also last year I think I said that I had excluded comedies, that I weren't counting comedies. I decided to forego that exclusion because I think that's a bit, even though I focus my channel more on dramas, I mean comedies are good too, I like them too, so I included those as eligible for this as well. So as far as I know, that means there were 28 shows that I watched this year that are eligible for this countdown, and I will count down my top 10 favorite out of those 28. And boy, there were a lot of good ones this year. So let's get started, but as always, I want to start off, before I get to my favorites of the year, I want to start off by naming my top 3 most disappointing shows of the year. So this isn't a worst list necessarily, because I don't really watch bad shows or shows that I like, but it's disappointing shows. So shows that had a season this year that wasn't quite as good as the previous years, or was just disappointing and didn't live up to the high standards that show had. And I do have to mention that House of Cards Season 5 doesn't make the list simply because I didn't watch it. So it's not fair of me to include a season that I didn't watch. I had to at least watch it to be eligible. However, I was so not interested in seeing that season. I heard it was so bad and disappointing that I didn't even watch it. But I can't include it because of that. It has to be a season that I watched. So we'll get into my top 3 most disappointing shows of 2018. We'll start with number 3, which is Cloak and Dagger Season 1. Now, typically I wouldn't include a Season 1 in the disappointing list, because usually disappointing means it wasn't as good as previous seasons, but this is the first season. But the first half of the season was really good, and it showed a lot of promise. The acting was good. I was really intrigued by the characters. It just got ruined in the final 3 episodes, particularly the finale, which was god-awful, which makes me not want to watch the show at all. So even though it was one season, it was disappointing. The second half was disappointing compared to the first half. Plus, This is a comic book that I was really into as a kid. It's not a very popular one, but it's one that I really liked. So I was really looking forward to seeing a television adaptation of it. And at first what they were doing with it was really interesting. But then, as I said, it just got ridiculous and dumb. And I was very disappointed in where they took the show. So anyway, we'll get into my number 2 most disappointing show of 2018, and that is Travelers Season 2. Travelers Season 1 made my top 10 list. I was completely blown away by it. I thought it was awesome. Season 2, I think, was a very poor follow-up. I mean, there were some interesting aspects of it, such as the Traveler 001, like the whole way they started the season by showing his backstory, and the 9/11 attacks, and having him be the mastermind behind it. I mean, that was a through storyline that was interesting, but most of the season was just a huge disappointment, particularly the way they kind of just shrugged off the cliffhanger of season 1 and kind of pretended like it didn't exist and just took the show in a totally different, more episodic fashion. I kind of forgot about all the setup in season 1, and the show got a bit more convoluted too. They introduced too many storylines that made it a bit convoluted, and the ending of the season was just ridiculous and stupid and made me not even want to watch the show anymore, but as I'll get to later, I actually did. Anyway, we'll get into my number 1 most disappointing show of 2018, and that is 13 Reasons Why Season 2. I know there's been a lot of hate on the net for 13 Reasons Why, but I absolutely love Season 1. I stand by Season 1. I think those who say that it promotes suicide or any nonsense like that is just total BS. I completely disagree with that. I totally related with Season 1 of 13 Reasons Why. I thought it was one of the most relatable shows or films or anything that I've seen that actually reminds me of what it was like to be a teenager and how depressing and and just awful it can be. But season 2 was totally unnecessary. First of all, because season 1 was very self-contained, and I even said that after season 1, it seems hard to imagine that they could keep the show going because season 1 was a fully contained story and didn't seem like you needed more after that. And unfortunately, I was completely right. Season 2 was completely unnecessary. It felt very tacked on. Many of the storylines were just rehashing those that were done better in season 1, and then it completely retconned the show in some really god-awful ways that not only hurts the season 2, but it actually makes me think less fondly on season 1. So I had to kind of pretend that some of the stuff in season 2 didn't happen in order for me to enjoy season 1 now. And plus, it just ended, the way it ended was ridiculous. So this felt less like something relatable that reminds me of what it was like to be a teenager, more like a stereotypical cheesy Hollywood BS teenage BS. So it was absolutely awful, and I have no intention of watching season 3. So anyway, enough with the negativity. Let me now get into my favorite TV shows of 2018. But before I get to my top 10, let me start with a few honorable mentions. And first of all, since my channel is all about Star Trek, I do feel like I do need to mention Star Trek Discovery. It did not make my top 10. It did not even make my honorable mentions. But so it came out as number 17 on the list of 28 shows. So it's not at the absolute bottom, because you know me, I'm not one of those people who's like, Discovery sucks. I didn't think it sucks. I did think it improved in the second half, but I thought that overall the season was very disjointed in terms of pacing and didn't really know what it was doing, and it had some issues even in the second half that I thought was better. So therefore, it didn't make my best list, but it didn't make my worst list either. It was, fine. I gave it a 7 out of 10, whatever. Anyway, let's get into my actual honorable mentions that almost made my top 10 list, and we'll start with Travelers Season 3. There we go, talking about Travelers again. Season 3 actually recovered after Season 2, which was, I was really impressed, because Season 2, as I said, ended in a very bad place, but they actually took that bad place and went in. The way they recovered from it was really impressive, and how they actually took that storyline and did something. They made something really interesting out of it. That was a through storyline that had some new characters like this FBI agent who's really interesting, and it set up a new dynamic for the show that was interesting. But most of the season was just kind of averagely good. Like, it didn't blow me away. That is until we got to the end of the season, where it had a run of like 2 or 3 episodes at the very end of the season, which did blow me away. I mean, some of the scenes were very highly dramatic, brought me to tears, and that ending was just, it did something that usually if I see shows or films do, I think is stupid and a mistake, but it actually pulled it off. And they did it, and they made it actually work for the show. And in fact, I think it was probably the best thing this show could have done, the way that they ended the season, which was very risky and mind-blowing, and I think the risk paid off. So we get into my next honorable mention, which is The Sinner Season 2. Now, unfortunately, I watched Season 1 of The Sinner after I did my last countdown for 2017. Otherwise, it would have been like number 4 on that list, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to include it in that list because I didn't see it until after I already did it, which I really regretted because I absolutely loved Season 1 of The Sinner and thought it was a masterpiece. Season 2 wasn't quite as good and didn't really live up to the greatness of Season 1. But like I said with 13 Reasons Why, The Sinner Season 1 was a self-contained story. And Season 2, they actually made it work. They made a Season 2 work, and that's by making it more of an anthology. In fact, I didn't think Season 2 felt more like a spin-off show than it did a Season 2 of a long-going show, because there's only one character who carried over, and it was just a completely and totally different story, but it was told in the same sort of vein, and I don't think what they did here worked quite as well as what they did in Season 1, but it was still really impressive, and there were still some really powerful moments, particularly towards the end of the season, that had me in tears, that really worked, so it was still a great show this year. So we'll get into my final honorable mention, which is Humans Season 3. Now, the first 2 seasons of Humans made my top 10 list. Season 3 didn't quite, even though I did really enjoy Season 3 of Humans. It had a lot more flaws than the first 2 seasons did. In fact, what I said about the first season in particular is that the pacing was perfect. But in Season 3, the pacing was actually off. And they had a few moments in there that I thought were just silly, over the top. And in the ending, they got into a bit too much of a fantasy realm, where typically this show was actually really good because it was realistic and relatable, where it got a bit too fantastical towards the end of Season 3. But it had this really interesting dynamic that the previous 2 seasons didn't have, of showing what it would be like to actually have the sentient androids, or synths as they called, the conscious synths, be a commonly known thing, and how it causes social strife in this world, and how humans have to deal with these conscious synths, and they sort of outlaw them and treat them, and then terrorist groups rise up, and there's tensions between them. And I think that was a really great dynamic that wasn't there in the first 2 seasons, which made this season really unique and really great. So finally, we get into my top 10 favorite TV shows of 2018, and we'll start with my number 10, Counterpart Season 1. Now, Counterpart was a really strong show. A lot of people recommended I see it, so I wouldn't watch. It has J.K. Simmons, who's an amazing actor. He plays, it's about, like, I suppose we'll call it a parallel universe, but it's not really a parallel universe, but it's like a parallel universe. It's another 2 universes that coexist, and you have J.K. Simmons, who plays like the asshole stereotype that he always plays, but then he also plays the nice guy stereotype that he plays from time to time. So it's interesting, he gets to play the 2 different types of characters that he often plays, and the way that they play off each other is amazing. And this show is very interesting because it plays almost like a very stereotypical Cold War type film with lots of spies and espionage and all that. And in fact, it even takes place in Berlin, as most Cold War films and shows do. In fact, I've never seen The Americans, but I would imagine it's this show makes me think of what I think the Americans would be like. It has that very espionage film, but instead of dealing with the Soviet Union and the Americans, it deals with two parallel universes, which is actually very interesting, and it allows for a bit more dynamic because you have the people on the opposing sides are basically the same, a different version of the same person, so they look alike, which allows for some more deeper work when it comes into the spying, if you know what I'm saying. A lot of more of an interesting dynamic. It actually reminds me a lot of Fringe storyline with Parallel Universe, except I actually think the way it's done here is a bit more realistic and a bit more interesting. So definitely was really impressed by Counterpart. So now we'll get into my number 9 best show of 2018, and that is Luke Cage Season 2. I think this is where I disagree with a lot of people. I think a lot of people said they weren't happy with Season 2 of Luke Cage. I was blown away by Luke Cage Season 2. Granted, it did have a very slow start, and the first couple episodes I'm like, oh, this is boring, why am I wasting my time? But it picks up and gets better, and has introduced some really dynamic characters. All the characters in this season were very fleshed out, very three-dimensional, very well acted, and it was interesting having the different dynamics. And plus they take characters that we're already familiar with, like Luke Cage, and giving him twists and turns that you didn't see coming, particularly the ending of the season, which absolutely blew my mind. I thought it was one of the best endings of any of these Marvel Netflix seasons, and it was actually, even though the first part was kind of slow paced, it didn't meander at the end as all these Netflix Marvel shows need to do. Instead, it ended very strong, and I was very impressed with that. So definitely liked Luke Cage Season 2. So next we get into my number 8, which is The End of the Fucking World Season 1. Although some people say you shouldn't call it Season 1 because it's probably the only season. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. The showrunner said they're still on the fence about that. But hopefully they won't, they're not going to do it just for the sake of doing it like 13 Reasons Why did. They said they're only going to do a Season 2 if they can think of a compelling story that makes it worthwhile, which is great, because I wouldn't mind if this season stood on its own, because it was an amazing season. It reminded me a lot of all these indie coming-of-age, weird indie movies about two disturbed teenagers or very eccentric teenagers going off on an adventure. But frankly, I think this is the best version of that I've ever seen. It's better than most of these indie films that I've seen. And particularly it came out around the same time that that movie, what was it called, Lady Bird, that was nominated for an Oscar, and I thought that this show was a billion times better than Lady Bird, in my opinion, of course. And this is another show that came out several years ago in the UK, but as I said, I'm going by how I get it here in my country, and I didn't get it until the very end of December last year, so it's eligible for this countdown. But anyway, it's about, if you don't know what it's about this kid who thinks he's a serial killer, who runs off an adventure with this girl who wants to be his girlfriend, who she's very disturbed and eccentric, and his plans is basically to kill her. But that doesn't actually happen. Instead, they end up going on a weird emotional journey, which I think was very well placed out. Totally bought it. Nothing about it seemed cliche. Some of the humor was a bit silly and over the top. Like they had Yara from Game of Thrones, and her character I thought was a bit unnecessary. Didn't really like her, but for the most part, when it focused on the main two characters, I thought it was absolutely amazing. One of the best coming of age stories that I've seen on screen. So next, we'll get into my number 7, which is BOJACK Horseman Season 5, which, yes, as I said, I'm including comedies, and this, actually, the more I thought about the season, the more I liked it. I think this could possibly be the best season of BOJACK Horseman yet. It was very dark, it had a lot of social commentary, it had a really great character arcs for Talking Horse and other talking characters, and at the same time it was funny. Now I will grant it probably wasn't as funny as it was as Season 1 and Season 2 were, because those seasons were actually really funny, but the emotional story behind it and the commentary they make in the character stories were a lot more interesting, a lot more dynamic. It had a few episodes that completely blew me away. None that I hated, whereas previous seasons I've had several episodes that I absolutely hated. This season didn't. It was very strong. Had like this mind-bending episode towards the end of the season where BOJACK Horseman is an actor in a TV show, and he's like taking all these drugs and he can't tell the difference between what is reality and what isn't. And that episode blew me away. The whole season was great. So BOJACK Horseman, my number 7. So next we'll get into my number 6, which is Westworld Season 2. Now, I wasn't as impressed with Westworld Season 1 as a lot of people were, and the flip side of that, though, is I wasn't as disappointed with Season 2 as a lot of Westworld fans were, because a lot of people were saying Season 1 was much better than Season 2, and they hated the ending of Season 2 or any of that nonsense, but I personally believe Season 2 was an improvement of Season 1. It was actually, in fact, much better, much more interesting, and I loved the ending. I thought the non-linear storytelling and the twists and turns were absolutely amazing. I know some people saying that they were disappointed because their theories didn't turn out to be true, like in Season 1. All their theories turned out to be true, but for me, that made the show more interesting, because Season 1 was kind of a bit too predictable because all the fan theories turned out to be right. I loved how Season 2 was more unpredictable, and most of the fan theories turned out to be wrong, and I find that a lot more interesting, that you can't predict where it goes, and it goes into this really weird and interesting places by maintaining these strong characters that they had in Season 1. In fact, in my opinion, improving upon some of the characters and making them even more interesting, more dynamic. There was only one episode this season that I thought was kind of bleh, whereas in Season 1 there were several episodes I thought were bleh. So I do think this was definitely an improvement. Great season this year. Westworld Season 2. So next, we'll get into my number 5, which is Better Call Saul Season 4. Now, Better Call Saul, this is probably my favorite season of Better Call Saul. It's unfortunate it only comes in at number 5 on my list, but there were actually 4 other shows that I loved even more. But I absolutely loved this season of Better Call Saul. I think this is the best to explore Jimmy McGill, aka Saul Goodman's character, the journey he went in, and seeing like it was really interesting, the intricacies, because it's a very slow show as always, but it allows a lot more character exploration. And again, this season there weren't any dull episodes the way there had been in previous seasons. Usually in the middle of the season it gets a bit boring. Here that didn't happen. It didn't get a bit boring. It was interesting throughout, had a very, very strong ending, very strong finale, and explored Jimmy and Kim's relationship, and how the relationship was in a lot of trouble this year, and also the effect that the death of the previous year had on Jimmy's character, which was actually very well done, very interestingly explored. Also, you get the backstory of some characters like Mike and Gus that lead up to how they are going to be portrayed in Breaking Bad. And so it's all very amazingly well done. Better Call Saul Season 4. So next, we'll get into my number 4, which again, I wish I could have put this higher, and that is The Expanse Season 3. Now, I make no secret that The Expanse is my favorite show currently on, although, Season 3 just wasn't my favorite season of the year. But as for ongoing shows, The Expanse is my favorite show going at the moment. There was a couple episodes this year that completely blew me away. I was really impressed with what they did to The Expanse. I think the acting was very strong. I think this was Stephen Strait, who plays the main character, James Holden. This was his best year of acting. It completely blew me away. The effects are great. My only qualms about the season, the only reason why it doesn't come in at number 1, is because I did think it had some pacing issues. It didn't adapt the 3rd book, which is my favorite book in the book series, as well as they could have. So it did feel a bit rushed, and the pacing of the season did feel a bit off, but it was still an amazing season. I still was so invested, so involved with the show. As I said, some episodes in particular, like the mutiny storyline, completely blew me away. So it was an absolutely amazing season, Season 3 of The Expanse. So now we'll get into my number 3, which is Daredevil Season 3, which I do believe is the best season of Daredevil. It's the best season of any Marvel Netflix show. This season completely blew me away. It took me off guard. And the reason why, even though I love The Expanse more than I ever loved Daredevil, I had to put this higher than The Expanse because this season was perfectly paced. The pacing this season was great, even though the first, again, kind of like Luke Cage, the first 2 episodes were kind of dull. But as soon as you get rolling, it really gets rolling. It introduces some really great new characters such as Bullseye, and it has this FBI detective, and he has this whole backstory which was so well developed. He was such a well developed character that what they did with his character development in the season was absolutely amazing. It was relatable, it was realistic, it was well acted, and on top of that you get the storyline of Matt Daredevil and the troubles that he goes through this season, as this is the season where he's recovering. He's probably at his weakest. He actually gets his ass kicked a lot more, which makes him an interesting character as opposed to the previous seasons where he wins every time. This time he was more weakened. He was in a weakened state because he nearly died, and how that dynamic that he has with the Kingpin, who is like an unstoppable foe. So it's like a totally badass game of chess throughout the season, where it seems like the Kingpin is always 2 moves ahead of Daredevil and his friends throughout the entire season, which makes it super intense. This is probably one of the most intense seasons of any show I've seen in a long time, that had me on the edge of my seat for almost the entire season. Absolutely amazing. Daredevil Season 3. So next, we'll get into my number 2, which is Black Mirror Season 4. Now, I know I've heard some people say this is one of the weaker seasons of Black Mirror, and I could not disagree with that more. I actually think that this is very firmly the best year of Black Mirror. Has most years of Black Mirror, there's 1 or 2 episodes I hate, and 1 or 2 episodes I think are okay, and then 1 or 2 episodes I think are great. Where this year, 5 out of 6 episodes I thought were great. I thought were amazing. Only 1 episode I thought was mediocre. No terrible episodes. Just 5 great episodes and 1 mediocre episode. And I know a lot of people disagree. Most people would put it half and half, say 3 are good, 3 are bad. Totally disagree. I think there were some very strong episodes this year. Some very dark episodes, including one in particular that made me want to go cry myself to sleep in the fetal position in the corner. And so another episode that made me feel good, that made me want to go out and cheer. And another episode that was such a great fun romp, tribute to Star Trek. And just every episode had something to say, and was done like the filmmaking, the craft, the acting, the cinematography, the music. Everything was at 100 this season. I think even more so than previous seasons. I mean, some people refer to it as a series of short films. I think even the Emmys consider it to be like a mini-series, like each episode is its own movie, which I can totally see with the craft and the care that was put behind each episode. And I think Black Mirror definitely outdid itself this year. So Black Mirror Season 4 is my number 2. So finally, we get into my number 1 favorite show of 2018, and it is Maniac. Now, I could call it Maniac Season 1, but hopefully it's not Season 1. Hopefully there's going to be no Season 2. It is presented as a limited series, so they intend for it to be the only season. So I do hope that they stick by that, because it really works as a limited series. This show absolutely blew me away. First of all, I saw the trailer for it, and it kind of reminds me of Cloud Atlas, where I like the trailer just as much as I like the movie, or in this case, just as much as I like the show. Like, even watching the trailer gives me goosebumps and almost tears in my eyes, but seeing the actual show itself was, of course, even better, because it's such an absurdist and a very obtuse show. My brother describes it as extremely weird, and it's definitely that. And usually, you know, I'm not always the biggest fan of the tongue-in-cheek sort of weirdness that's kind of done to comedy, but in this case I think it absolutely works, because it's combined with some very thought-provoking, very mind-bending stories. So it's one of those shows that, like, each time you watch it, you pick up new things, and it's so deep and so a lot of analogies that you can just analyze this show forever and come up with a lot of different interpretations. And I have seen this show twice, and the second time I saw it, it made me appreciate the show even more as I picked up on new nuances. And the more you read about it, there's a lot of interesting thought put into it. Amazing. It's like an understatement to say that they're amazing character journeys. I mean, Jonah Hill and Emma Stone were both absolutely amazing in this show this year, and the character journeys the characters went through, again, it's an understatement to say that they were mind-blowing. They were just amazing. And the whole show, how it had like different fantasies, and like the reality that the show took place was actually felt less real than some of the fantasies they went into, which added to the mind-bending nature of the show. So I could not be more impressed if this was a movie. And it could have been a movie unless because they wanted to fit into 10 hours, it had to be a show. But if this was a movie, it would definitely be my favorite movie of the year. It is my favorite show of the year. Maniac absolutely blew me away, which means my top 3 favorite shows this year are on Netflix. So I guess Netflix just did really good this year. So Maniac, my number 1 favorite show of 2018. So anyway, that is it for my top 10 favorite shows of 2018. I have a couple more videos coming out to wrap up the end of the year, such as my personal awards for TV show, like Best Actor, Best Cinematography, stuff like that. Also, my top 10 favorite movies and my top 20 favorite episodes of 2018. So be sure to check that out. Also, check out my channel as I do many more videos on many of the shows mentioned here. I also cover other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.